A happy weekend to all of you, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to Joe Stonner Boxing. I hope your weekend's going well. Let's talk a bit about the big zero, the big O as they call it. I don't call it an O because O is a letter. I go with zero because I'm pedantic like that. But let's talk about the importance of it, because I think in the history of the sport, it's never been more important in the eyes of the public. Actually, not just the public, but, you know, boxing journalists, promoters, broadcasters, they want that zero. Anything less than that zero is considered a black mark. And to me, the zero has never, ever been that important. It's never defined greatness or a career. Now, that's not to say that provided you fought good people and you've had a long career and you finish with a zero, that it's not a tremendous achievement. It clearly is, you know. So Calzaghe, Ricardo Lopez, Marciano, you know, great careers, did what they had to do. But if you sift through their records, they're long. There's a lot of, like a glut of people who are really second-raters who kind of pad out the record. And I don't mean that insultingly to those fighters, because I accept that all three of those were, you know, great fighters. But let's look at other great fighters, especially when we go back in time. You know, especially back to like 100 years ago, say. Excuse me. So we'll take a few obvious names to start with. How about Sugar Ray Robinson? Finished with 19 defeats on his record. Anyone want to say that Sugar Ray Robinson is not a top 10 all-time great? A lot of people have him at number one. For me, yeah, you can definitely make a case for him being number one, definitely. But if you don't put him in the top 10, you're probably you've got a hell of an argument to make there. He had 19 defeats. Henry Armstrong is often cited as another top three all-time great. Henry had, I think, 21 defeats. Who else we got? Willie Pep. He had, I think it was 11 defeats. I may have got that wrong. I think it was 11, and he was stopped about 6 or 7 times, I think. He also had over 200 or 230 wins. Was it 240 wins? Again, offhand, I can't remember. But anyone want to doubt that Willie Pep wasn't a truly great featherweight? What about Benny Leonard in the lightweights? He had 11 defeats, and yeah. And also, going back to Armstrong, I always think an interesting point about Henry Armstrong is that he lost his first ever fight. He was knocked out in the third round of a 4-rounder. Can you imagine if someone got knocked out in the third round of a 4-rounder against, I think the guy's name was Al Lavino, and it was he had something like a 6 wins, 7 defeats and 3 defeats record. What a thing to have on your resume. I knocked out Henry Armstrong. Never mind the rest of my career, I just knocked out Henry Armstrong. But, you know, can you imagine now? How would the broadcasters react? How would the promoters react? The guy gets knocked out in 3 in his debut. He's damaged goods, blah, blah, blah. But anyway, let's talk about, what about the heavyweights? What about the heavyweights of 100 plus years ago? What about the unsung ones? Sam Langford. Sam Langford had 30 defeats on his record. 30. Now, a big part of that might be that he was never really a heavyweight. He was 5'8", 5'7", 5'8", something like that. Fighting heavyweights. I think he held the black, what was it called, the coloured heavyweight. We're talking the era of tremendous racism, where there was the quote-unquote coloured heavyweight title and coloured titles for other divisions. Sam held it. The colour bar was in place. He didn't get a shot at the quote-unquote real heavyweight title, meaning blacks and whites, or whites predominantly then. But tremendous fighter, 30 defeats on his record. Right? Can you imagine Canelo, who was probably a similar size, taking on, you know, heavyweights nowadays, picking up defeats and saying, I don't care, I'll, you know, give me the next fight. I mean, it's a different era. Harry Wills, Joe Jeanette, other great heavyweights. I think Jeanette had 9 defeats. No, was it Jeanette or was it Wills? I always get those two mixed up. Harry Wills had about 12 defeats. These may not be entirely accurate, but they had defeats, is my point. You get the point I'm making, okay? Now, let's contrast this with the modern world, where the zero is all important, and I think this is largely down to Mayweather and all that 50-0 crap. You got your 50th win, mate, against a guy who never had a professional fight before, and inexplicably you made hundreds of millions of dollars out of it, because you are very good at manipulating and exploiting the utter stupidity and ignorance of the casual. And, you know, you're a big guy, you wear a lot of chains, you've got a lot of cars, you've got a lot of diamond watches and all that. So for some reason that, I guess, would you call it the hip hop culture? I don't know. They love all that glitzy shit. Okay. So you're 50-0, and that's an achievement, and you face great men, Floyd, but you're responsible for this zero being the all-important thing in the modern world. So let's take two fighters who are twins, who are currently both world champs, and we're going to compare and contrast them. I'm talking, of course, about the Charlo brothers. You've got Jamal Charlo, who's a middleweight who holds the WBC title. Let's go into his record to start with. He's undefeated. He's got 32 wins, no defeats, no draws, 22 KOs. So he hasn't fought this year. He's got a fight scheduled. I think it's against Sulecki for next month, is it? Or in May? Yeah, it's June. I think it's in June. But the last fight he had was last year, which was a year ago, against Juan Montiel. He won a unanimous decision, wide unanimous decision. That was the only fight he had last year. He had one fight in 2020, which was against Sergei Derevyanchenko. That was on points as well. And he won it easily. I think one of the cards was quite close, like a 116, 112, if memory serves. Prior to that, you go back to 2019, he fought, wait for it, drum roll, twice in 2019. Ooh, yes, he did. He stopped Dennis Hogan in 7 rounds, and he outpointed Brandon Adams. So over the last 3 years, he's won this WBC title. He's probably been making pretty decent money. PBC fighter. He's been picking up wins, but they're not exactly against a sort of murderer's row, are they? But he's a champ, and this is not meant to slag him off. This is not meant to, put him down or anything. He's a very good fighter. But Brandon Adams, Dennis Hogan, Derevyanchenko, Montiel, it's not exactly a murderer's row for 3 years of work. But he's undefeated, you know what I mean? He's undefeated. So let's go to his brother, who's Jamal Charlo, who's down at light middleweight or super welterweight, if you prefer. And he is the current unified super welterweight champ. All 4 belts. You may have seen him recently. He won his fight against Brian Castano. Now his record isn't quite so glossy. He's got 35 wins with 19 KOs, but he's also got a defeat on his record and a draw. But let's go back over the last 3 years. Brian Castano, as we just said, stopped him in 10 rounds. Was it last month or was it this month? It was this month, wasn't it? Yeah, we're in May, yeah. Then before that, we go back to last year. Back in July, he got a draw with Castano. Great fight. Both those fights were really good. And Castano was a worthy opponent, a tough guy who came to win, never stopped trying to win, even when he was in trouble. Before that, he fought Jason Rosario, stopped him in 8. Then he had a rematch prior to that. By the way, we're talking 1 fight a year. So Castano this year, 2022. 2021 was Castano, the first fight. 2020 was Jason Rosario, stopped him in 8. Go back to 19 and we got ourselves in fighting twice, just like his brother. And he fought Tony Harrison. That was a rematch. They drew in 2018. Harrison got stopped in 11 rounds. And then prior to that, he fought, this was in 2019, he fought Jorge Cotta, stopped him in 3. So we've got, if you go back to 2018, where he had his defeat, and then we've got a draw last year. Okay, he's drawn and he's lost. And he avenged both those victories with knockout wins. Convincing wins, very convincing wins. You've got to ask yourself, is the quality of the opposition better than his brother? And I would say yes. I would say that Castano is better than anything that his brother faced. If you go back even further, you're talking, this is Jamel, the super welterweight. He beat Austin Trout. That was only a majority decision, but I thought he won it. He stopped Erickson Lubin in a round. 2018, this is 2017. The quality of the opposition is better. And also, as a result of fighting the better opposition, he's unified an entire division. Whereas his brother has been largely inactive. It's not as if Jamal Charlo has been super active. He hasn't. But Jamal has been inactive. I can't think of another word for it. I don't think he's had any injuries or anything like that. But as a result of, he loses to a guy, he comes back and beats him, he draws with a guy, immediate rematch, as a result of this, he's picked up 4 belts, and it will go in the record books as an undisputed champ. So to me, his resume is far more impressive than his brothers. Jamel Charlo is far more impressive than Jamal Charlo in terms of resume, certainly in terms of achievements. Jamal is stagnating. There's no other word for it. And Jamel, even though he's not been super active, he's at least unified a division. But you put your... I mean, neither of these is in any way comparable to what we talked about earlier, which is the old-timers who were fighting every other week. But it seems to me that if you don't take risks, you ain't going to... It's the risk-reward thing. If you don't take the risks, you're not going to create a legacy. And while I understand that the PBC fighters are making decent money, because Heyman makes sure they make decent money, you got to decide, I mean, both the Charlos are 32 now. Do they just want to live comfortably for the rest of their lives? Well, we all want that. But if you're in boxing, don't you want to achieve stuff? I've got a lot of time for Jamel Charlo, having unified those divisions and taken the rematches. And Jamel Charlo, you're in the middleweight division. Is there really no one you can fight? I don't get it. To me, if I had that level of talent, I'd want to be fighting really good fighters. I'd want to be winning those belts. I'd want to be unifying those divisions. And we see this quite a lot with the PBC lot. Tank Davis. Tank, you're not a world champ at super lightweight, mate. Josh Taylor is the champ. Or it should be Jack Catterall is the champ. But currently it's Josh Taylor. You won a secondary belt. Don't kid yourself that you're a champ, mate. Your resume, knocking out Leo Santa Cruz is really just a featherweight. Yeah, it looks good on paper, but the guy was, 2 divisions smaller than you, mate. All right, and we saw it with other PBC fighters. I just don't get it. If I had that level of talent, I would want to be fighting regularly. I would want to be fighting for belts. I'd want to be fighting the absolute best, win, lose, or draw, so that when I get to the end of my career, I look over my shoulder and I say, I fought the best. I left nothing on the table. I left it all in the ring. Win, lose or draw, I maximised my potential. And I know where I stand in history, even if others don't. Because there is such a thing as personal pride, personal ambition and so on. So yeah, I just thought I'd put that out there. The cult of the zero, it means nothing to me. It doesn't mean anything to me. I don't care about unbeaten records. I really don't. I'm a show me guy. Show me what you got, Even domestically, I can think of when I was much younger, I can think, back in the 90s, I can think of people like Del Bryan, very good British welterweight champ who won a Lonsdale belt outright. He had loads of defeats on his record. I think he had about 11 defeats when he won the title. And he carried on for too long. I think he ended up with about 18 defeats on his record. But, Paul Silky Jones is another one, WBO light middleweight champ. He had defeats on his record. I saw both these guys fight live and they were exciting to watch, but they would fight anyone. They were on the road fighters, and they came good. Dell won the British title, won a Lonsdale belt outright. Paul Silky Jones ended up with a WBO light middle title. They're in the record books, and they can say I fought everyone. I didn't duck anyone. But anyway, you get the message. You know what I'm on about. All right. So leave your thoughts below. Thanks for listening in as always. If you're new to the channel, hit the subscribe button. I always appreciate that. And enjoy the rest of your weekend. I will speak to you soon. Much love to you. Take care of yourselves.